time, so now I would like to ask the next guest, who is Mr. Frederik Vaes from Brussels Environment, and he will be talking about his Belgium approach of in forestry management system in the Brussels part of Zonian forest. So Frederik, thank you for your arrival here, and please start. Thank you.
Thank you, Micha. I'm trying to share my screen. And I was already a little too far. Do you see my presentation?
Yeah, we see the presentation, but it is still in, yeah, now it's in correct mode. Perfect.
Okay, thank you, Micha, for the floor. Thank you, Ivar, for your explanation, because I understand that you have a situation, but we in Brussels have multiple situations, and I'll take you on a guidance tour in my office. You were talking about a large scale, and I will be talking on a micro scale concerning management, as you can see, of 160-year-old beech stands in the Sonian forest. First, I'm going to situate the Sonian forest. Sonian forest is in the heart of Western Europe, and it's situated in the Atlantic, representative for the moment in the Atlantic beech forest region, making part of the UNESCO World Heritage Sites, which have been explained yesterday, if I understand it well, by Caroline. So I must excuse myself for not having followed yesterday's presentation. So it can be that I'm telling things for the second or maybe a third time. So, but don't worry, I will try to guide you through our Sonian forest. And this is a map showing the Sonian forest in 3 colors. And in the northwestern part, you see the heart of Europe, or the city of Brussels. We are about 10K away from the heart of the capital of Europe. And my forest, or the part of the forest where I am the manager, is the dark green part. That's the Brussels region forest. What's brown or pink, I'm not sure about the colors because I'm colorblind, but you see Vlaams Gewest, that's the Flemish part of the Sonian forest. And in the utmost side, southern part, you see the Région Wallonne, that's the Walloon part of the Sonian forest. What's the situation? The situation is that we've got 3 different legislations, because there are 3 regions, 3 state parties, in fact, involved. But nevertheless, we as managers talk with each other, and we try to manage the forest in the same direction. And there are some particularities, like the whole of the Sonian forest is Natura 2000 area. It's a protected landscape on the whole site. It's a protected landscape. The Flemish part and the Brussels part are FSC certified, and the Walloon part is PEFC certified. So you see there are already some differences in certification system. In the Flemish part, the trees are talking Dutch. In the Walloon part, the trees are talking French. And in the Brussels part, we talk all languages. As I told you, we make part of the UNESCO World Heritage series. Here you see the different sites, and it's been colored in purple, if my color blindness doesn't falsify it. And the Brussels parts are the 5B and the 5C. The 5A is the biggest one, is in the Flemish region, and the 5D and 5E are in the Walloon region. So we have we have a politically correct distribution of the UNESCO sites. Welcome to my office. This is a picture taken in our UNESCO site, an old beach stand of about 200 years old. And when you look at the vegetation, it's a rather poor vegetation, but it's not a correct explanation for the extreme well-growing to 45, and the highest are up to 48 meters high. What's so special? We've got 4,400 hectare beech dominated forest. Now I'm talking for the whole of the Sonian forest, not just for the Brussels part. We've got beech dominated stands, about 65% or 2,650 hectares are beech dominated stands. And we've got 6 big old beeches and oaks with a DBH more than 80 centimeters per hectare. This is quite impressive, because as I have been told and as I have been reading, in virgin beech forest, we have about the same amount of big trees in these diameter classes. Some site indices and a bit of history. We have a mean temperature of 10.5 centigrade. We have an annual precipitation of about 850 millimeters. And we have got an acid loam that's been developed in leached loessic soils since the last ice age. And what's very rare in Belgium is that this site has been always under forest cover. So it's never been under agriculture regime. It has been always under forest cover since the last ice age. And in a historical perspective, it's important to know that since the 1780s, there have been massive beech plantings. They've been started by the Austrians, which were at that time our governors. And they started these massive beech plantings to restore the forest, because it had been overcut before. They have been overcut because the capital of Belgium was developing itself and has had important needs of wood. Enormous amounts of woods have been cut in the Sonian forest. So it's not a primeval beech forest. It's an old growth beech forest and not primeval beech forest. Because it's not because that I'm saying that there have been massive beech plantings, that beech wasn't present in the Sonian forest before, but it was not as important as it is now and as it has begun in the 18th century. I already told you that we are a Natura 2000 site, so we don't have only beech forests, but we've got also 9160 stands, so they are hornbeam oak forests with typically very old oaks and sometimes impressive wild cherries like you see here on the photo. What's very particular too is that there is a rather spectacular spring aspect. Spring flowering is very impressive. And we've got also 9130. These are stands with bluebell domination at the end of this month. So that's very particular for the Sonian forest and for the Atlantic beach region on this type of soils. So there are a lot of tourists coming when they visit Brussels in normal times to go and look at the bluebells, not only in the Sonian forest, but also in a nearby forest, which is the forest of Hal. What's the recent news? Well, there have been some interesting things happening since 2005. Since 2005, we have got a massive natural regeneration of beach. And it's not only a massive natural regeneration, it's an ongoing natural regeneration of beach. And we don't have a real good answer on the question why suddenly there is natural regeneration of beach. And there have been studies led since 1997 and these studies have been finished in 2003, and no one had a clear answer. But suddenly in 2005, natural regeneration was coming and was laughing at the scientists who put the question, why was there no natural regeneration? Our old beach stands have been heavily impacted by storms in the 80s, and in 1990 we had a real hurricane. So at that moment, in one afternoon, hundreds of hectares have been blown down, and some scientists see some explanation in more dynamic forest development, and that natural regeneration that I was talking about would be started by a more dynamic forest management. In this case, forest management started by storms and a hurricane. Rather particularly is the event of good seed years every 2 to 3 years since 2000. Before we had good seed years every 5 to 7 years. Now we see good seed years every 2 to 3 years. And then immediately you could question the climate change effects playing a role in these seed years. All these recent events have changed the aspect of the Sonian forest. The cathedral grove stands have changed, have had a facelift, and have become what I call a crowded house. It's not everywhere happening like this, but if you had taken a picture here 20 years ago, you would have seen something like on the slide before. Ivar has been showing a nice map in his presentation. It was a nice patchwork. I've got also a map with a nice patchwork. This is just for the Brussels region, but our Flemish colleagues have a similar mapping of the stands. And this map is showing, in fact, the different types of management. Everything that's blue on the map are beach stands or beach-dominated stands. And where you see my arrow, you see the stand I would like to explain in respect of the actual management. The World UNESCO Heritage Site here on the map. All what is striped blue are cathedral stand groves with a typical cathedral stand aspect. Everything that's dark green, I think it's dark green. As I told you, I'm a colorblind guy. Everything that's dark green are oak dominated stands or will be transformed into beech oak stands. But that's not the subject of my presentation. I'm going to take you into this type of stand and explain on a micro scale the management. Again, the map of the Sonian forest and its situation. Welcome into the stand. I'm going to explain to you how it's management or how it's managed actually. We do this type of management since about 5 years, And for the whole of the Estonian forest, it covers about 1/3 of the total surface. About 1,200 hectares will be managed like this. And I will explain how we do it and why we do it. Some technical explanations for those who aren't foresters. I'm going to talk about basal area, and basal area is expressed in square meters per hectare and says something about the density of the stand. And we've got stands with a density of 40 square meters per hectare. That means it's very dense, it's dark. When you go and walk there in the summer, it's too dark for a development of undergrowth. Most of our stands have a basal area of 30 square meters per hectare. And we've got a standing volume of about 600 cubic meters per hectare. Most of those stands have a mix of with 20% of oak. As you can see on my picture, you see here a sessile oak in companion of beech nearby. There's natural regeneration of beech, not everywhere. It's a patchwork of natural regeneration. And what we do before starting management is making an inventory of habitat trees and an inventory of future high value trees, either call them target trees as you wish. So a nice inventory is being made before we start to manage such stands, such 160-year-old stands of beech-dominated forest. We've got about 18 big oaks per hectare with a DBH of 50 centimeters. That's a diameter on breast height. So DBH, when I'm talking about DBH, there are diameters. We've got about 117 beeches per hectare with a DBH between 15 and 100 centimeters. So there's a high range of diameters. And we've got about 39 harvestable beeches with a DBH bigger than 60 centimeters per hectare. Quite interesting is that we are paying a lot of attention to habitat trees, and as you can see, 17 habitat trees per hectare are monitored and are measured and are categorized. A habitat tree for us in our management are trees that never will be cut. So in this case, they are living trees. Often these are trees with big diameters, and very often they are old big oaks in a mix with the beeches. And we've got about 21 future high value trees per hectare with a DBH smaller than 60 centimeters. In fact, they are target trees. If we are gonna do commercial thinnings, it's to favor the position of those target trees. If we map all this, you get some nice maps like this one, and all the green triangles are habitat trees, and all the blue dots are target trees. So that's for me and for our teams, it's a key map for starting to manage this type of stands. We want to know what we've got, and we want to know how we are gonna manage it to get to realize our goals for these kind of stands. So that's my next question. What do we want? We aim a basal area of 18 to 22 square meters per hectare. Why aiming this, coming from 30 square meters per hectare? Because we suppose, and it's supposed in literature equally, that that's the perfect basal area for an optimal light quality, to have all different age categories and a good potential mix of tree species. We want multi-layered stands. And that's one of the aims of Natura 2000, multi-layered stands. And to get multi-layered stands, we have, in fact, to lower this basal area of 30 square meters to about 18 to 22 square meters per hectare. And we want to get mixed stands with 50% beech and 50% other species. And the other species are oak, sessile oak, hornbeam, and the Carpathians betelus, and small-leaved linden, lime trees, Tilia cordata. And most of all, we want to maintain a continuous forest cover. For as far as the management is described in the management plan for the Brussels region, no more clear cuts will be done. Even no group selection cuts will be done. It will be, if there are cuttings, it will be cuttings or harvests in a single tree selection system. And as I already told you, favoring Quercus petraea, Carpus petrus, and Tilia cordata. The Tilia cordata and Quercus petraea are rather rare in the Estonian forest. So if natural regeneration is not coming spontaneously, we will introduce them by planting, but not massive planting. There are real little spots, little plots that will be planted in this kind of stands, what the Germans call Klumpen, and what we call cellule cells, planting cells. When I have to explain it to the people, my guards that are actually responsible for the management in the field, in the forest, I often refer to this kind of rather mathematical drawing, but it explains very well what the ideal situation could be. A mix of tree species, multi-layered forest, and natural regeneration that's spontaneously coming, so that it's a self-sustaining cycle with a minimal intervention, but with the opportunity of harvesting high-valued trees. How getting there? So we are still far from this ideal situation, and the aim, the final goal of getting to what I showed here, that will take for this type of stands at least 40 years or maybe even 80 years. So it's a long time vision, knowing that the actual management plan is only planned for 24 years. I had nevertheless a horizon, a management horizon of 40 to 80 years further than what we see actually going on in the forest. So how getting there? Lowering the basal area is one key feature I already mentioned, but not just lowering the basal area, but not to shock either this kind of stands. That means that we will not take more than 20% of the basal area in one intervention. Or if you translate it in square meters, it's about 5 to 6 square meters per hectare per intervention. Meaning in the practice management that we take about 10 big trees with a DBH of 80 centimeters per hectare and per rotation. And our rotation is an 8-year rotation. So we come every 8 years, we come back in the same stand, and we do in fact the same kind of interventions. How are we going to mix this kind of stands? That means in the first rotations that we are not going to harvest other species than beech. As I told you, we've got a little mix with oak in this kind of stands. it would be crazy to cut these oaks, even if they have a potential a high value or a highly added value. We are not gonna harvest those oaks because then we lose a species in the mix. Probably we will never gonna harvest those big oaks because we consider them as seed trees. So we hope that at a given stage, these oaks are gonna give natural regeneration so that we get to that self-sustaining system I've been talking about. We will be harvesting mainly beeches and mainly big beeches close to the other species. In this case, we are talking about big beeches close to oaks, linden, or hornbeams. And we will introduce missing species, like I said already, by planting little plots of missing species. We want a continuous cover forest. So we're talking, in fact, about plantering. I don't know if it's the correct term in English. But so, yes, as I said, we are gonna harvest less than 20% of the basal area. And we never harvest two neighboring big trees, just to prevent to make bigger holes in the stand to risk to destabilize the stand. Some maths. I show here a diagram that explains the stand we've been seeing in basal area. If you see 5.69 and 23.29 and you make the sum, you summarize it, then you get about 29 square meters per hectare as basal area. That's before the intervention. What's in brown, that's the part of the basal area that's taken by oak. So you see, we've got mainly two tree species. It's beech, 23 square meters, and oak, about 6 square meters of basal area per hectare. After the intervention, I'll show you later a diagram, but if you look at the inventory for this type of stands, you see in the vertical axis just the number of trees, and in the horizontal axis, you see the circumference on breast height. And you see that these are stands dominated by a lot of big trees. And most of the trees are in the circumference categories between 170 and 325 centimeters. There are mainly big beeches, but there are also a lot of, or rather big oaks in the mixture. The trees that are being cut are marked in black. So those are trees that are harvested. And as you see in this diagram, you see that in this case, we've been harvesting 7 big beeches, and we've got been thinning 10 beeches per hectare. Those beeches in thinning are mainly beeches that are in concurrence with the oaks in the stand. And 7 big beeches are harvested mainly close to big oaks to favor the oaks in the mixture. And that means in a diagram that we lower the basal area only in the beech situation. So where you see now 18.94, it was 23 point and a bit. So we harvested beeches and only beeches, and we lowered the basal area with about 5 square meters per hectare. For so far, a little bit of mathematics. What means it in the practice? Where you see 2 arrows. At the left-hand side, you see an arrow there. A big oak has been harvested, and at the right-hand side, a big no, not a big oak, a big beech has been harvested, and at the right-hand side, a big beech has been harvested close to the oak that's in front of us. That's in fact the principle of the single tree selection system. And in this case, we are mostly harvesting big beeches and no more than 10 per hectare. As a result, you can see then this type of stems that have been harvested. Particular conditions for harvesting these big trees are that we don't allow the man who comes and harvests the beech to take the whole tree. He may take maximum 16 meters, and the rest of this beech has to stay in the forest. And that has to stay in the forest because we want to make the amount of dead wood in a rather spectacular way bigger than it was before. I'm talking about extra bonuses of this kind of management. That is that we will reach, or we hope to reach, the Natura 2000 goals. I was talking about dead wood. I was talking about multi-layering. I was talking about mixing species. It's less management, and it's not only a less shocking management for the forest, but it's a less thing that Caroline has been talking yesterday about the presence of a lot of people visiting the forest. Certainly now with the recent lockdowns, we've seen tens of thousands of people on sunny Sunday afternoons, and a lot of people are very sensitive to cuttings. So if you do a clear cut or you do a single tree selection system, then the effect on the public is very, very different. We want a good buffer zone management, so that means that we want to maintain the microclimate. As I have understood, Pierre Ibisch has been explaining the effect of a beech forest on the microclimate inside the forest. But don't forget that the Estonian forest is close to the capital of Europe and has probably a cooling effect on the big city nearby. And it's a very challenging forest management. I think it's very thrilling to do this type of forestry, this type of forest management. It's something new I have introduced since 5 years, where before it was a rather traditional forest management with commercial thinnings and finally clear cuts and replanting, where we are now trying to evolve to a single tree selection system. And it's based on facts and reflections. You saw my inventory maps, so everything is very well documented. It's very well discussed before we go and harvest trees. And it's triggered by good observation. We need to be in the forest as a forester. Are there some disadvantages? Question mark. It's a more complex management. Is that a disadvantage? I don't know. I think it's rather complex, but it's very challenging. You are forced to think about your management. You are forced to be in the forest to observe your management. It's less predictable, that's true. Clear cut is very predictable, and regeneration is very predictable. In that case, when you are going to plant your regeneration. It's giving more difficulties in harvesting big trees, that's true. You have to change the contractors' working methods in the forest too. And the forester has to be more in his forest. I mention this because many of my colleagues are often behind the screen instead of in the real office in the forest. And you need to be able to think in 3 dimensions, or even in 4 dimensions in time, when time is playing a very important factor as a horizon. I've been talking about a horizon of 40 to 80 years. even out of the frame of the actual management plan. And beech is also a perfect companion for the sessile oak. And I wanted to introduce this slide because we want to introduce more Quercus petraea, because it's a species that is estimated to react better on climate change effects. And we want to lower the presence of beech, which is actually 65% of the forest, with about 10% at the end of the actual management plan within 24 years. And we want to replace it by sessile oak, but not by clear cutting, but in a single tree selection system. And as you can see here, you see sessile oak with natural regeneration underneath. And if the basal area conditions are perfect, this natural regenerations has the opportunity to grow through up to the upper layers of the forest. Very important, and that's often forgotten or is not enough thought about, is education of your foresters. As I told before, it's a real changing of tradition. In 5 years' time, it's starting to percolate to the foresters in the forest. And as it is a rather complex system, and as if we don't have really very good functioning single tree selection system actually present in the Sonian forest, it's a work of a longue haleine, comme on dit en français, so it's a long-term education to come to situations like this one where you see an old beech stand with an understory of maples, hornbeam, and natural regeneration equally of beech. So this was my presentation. Thanks to the beech and its power, I would say.
Thank you, Frederik, for your presentation. We had a bit, you had a bit of technical, I would say, issues, but some delays on some points, but it was still good enough, and I think that we all hear everything what you said. So if someone has some questions for Frederik, please write in chat, raise your hand. I think this your Sonian forest is a good example of how you can, I would say, with plants and in advanced think forestry system, how you can turn this completely, I would say, human generated forest into some natural forest, which is coming now. So also, I don't know how all of you know, but Sonian forest was in past. There was a lot of different human activities like charcoal production and so on, and wood cutting, and this close relation to Brussels is also causing some quite some impact on the forest. So it's really good to have this kind of management. Okay, I see we have some questions now from the floor. First one is from Radu. Interesting, it's like a school and a research combined with production. Harvesting is easy to do on small and flat areas. Imagine how to manage on 10 times larger areas and in mountains. And what is the volume standing or laying dead wood in Sonian forest?
There are two questions in one.
Yeah.
Actually, since the last inventory, we've seen that we are about at 8% of the standing volume is actually dead wood. So that's pretty good, and it's been rising in a rather spectacular way since about 5 years. As I told, The wood extraction is limited to the only underneath 16 meters, and all the rest has to stay in the forest. We see evenly that it's got almost no impact on the price, because what's left in the forest is firewood quality, and firewood is something that is hard to sell actually in our forest. Yeah, it's easy to do on small and flat areas. Yes, that's true. There it's much easier. It's even so that we have got steep slopes and very sensitive valleys that are put in set-aside zones. There is no intervention, or if there is an intervention, we just do the cutting and leave the wood on the ground. If that is an answer to the questions of Radu.
Thank you, Frederik. There was also one question from Ruktrana. How is with the economics of your system?
Well, I can be very clear in my answer. Economic situation isn't important for the Brussels region. So it's a screen for the visitors of the Sonian forest. Ecological values are much more important. But to give you an idea about every year for the whole of the Sonian forest, about 20,000 cubic meters is being sold. It's been sold standing, so they are standing trees at about a mean price of 50 euros per cubic meter. And it's mostly beech and mostly big beeches. So that's not a high price we get, therefore. And unfortunately, most of those beeches are put in containers and are transported via the port of Antwerp to China or Asia.
Thank you. I also have I think Marcus is raising hand. And Marcus, please.
Thank you, Miha. Thank you very much again for your presentation, Frederik. I think that in this context of our workshop here, that we saw many useful techniques that we should keep in mind for the thing we want to achieve, and which is a handbook with best practice examples for close to nature or sustainable forest management. And I think these what you mentioned, selection of habitat trees that are being kept in the forest, and the single tree selection system, and also very interesting that you do not harvest two neighboring trees should be very important, but also the fact that you emphasized on the educational part of the foresters. So this is also something that we should definitely keep in mind. However, I see that we have very different situations in all of our buffer zones. As Radu, for example, said, it's difficult to apply this method in a mountainous area that is 5 or 10 times as big. But maybe, we can. I hope that we can somehow find a common ground and a common understanding. And what I like at this workshop and at this event is that we already see that we can exchange and learn from each other, and maybe get something out of it for our own component parts. So that's what I see, and I'm happy for that. So
yes.
Thank you, Frederik.
Can I answer a short answer to what you tell here, Marcus, and to Ivar too? I'm a privileged forester, so I'm not driven by economical goals. I've got a lot of personnel on the train, so I've got a lot of guards. I've got the luxury of being able to apply this system. So that's really a privilege. And my sensitivity to education comes from my history as an instructor. So I've been forest instructor too. So it's very important to explain to people why you are doing and how you are doing things, because else you risk to lose them.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thanks.
What Frederik, you talked about when you talked about this lockdown, you have cats and this number of people which were started to coming in the forest. And since you have very, I would say, small forests, how can the forest handle so big amounts of people? We know that in general, not all people are educated regarding the, I would say, behavioral rules in forests, and especially in some primeval or old growth forest in your case. How are you dealing with this situation?
Yes, luckily the UNESCO sites are in the center of the forest. That's much less frequented, but we have seen a lot of people coming, and I would say there is no problem for as far as people respect the rules of the forest. It's a pity that 1% maybe of the visitors doesn't respect all the rules, and they cause the most of the damage. We see an impact on the roe deer population. We see elephant trails that are forming in the stands. We see an impact on the flora. So that's a bad thing. On the other hand, the Brussels people are very happy to have a forest nearby, because else the first lockdown that we have had would have been unsupportable for them, I think. And what we've seen too is that a lot of people actually are discovering or rediscovering the forest, and they are amazed by its grandeur, by its beauty, and that's something that's very important too. And it's very important to dialogue with them and to explain how this forest is managed, how it has been in the past. It's got a very rich history, and politicians are actually very sensitive to all these aspects. So this crisis has been moving also something on the political level, and I hope it will be more than some words in vain, but will be followed by actions.